everyone's phone's on silent.
Yes, he said. Yes. We are safe and sound. How do I sit like a normal human?
Yeah, just vibes, isn't it?
Oh.
Yeah. Hi. Welcome to the debate. I'm Tom, head of tech here at Inquire, and this is the candidate running for VP of Postgraduate Studies.
So, hi, I'm Ben. I am both the current VP of Postgraduate Studies, Postgraduate Experience, rerunning for a second term, and I used to be, I suppose, just to fit in with the thing, a former history student, and I've been here 6 years, so quite a while.
So I guess we're going to kick off with one of the main questions tonight is what is your stance on the NUS referendum that's happening for the third time in the past 3 years or 4 years?
Yes, I think you're about right. Yeah. So my stance on NUS is a bit of an odd one. So generally, I suppose I'll start with a front on political leaning. So generally, I'm quite left leaning, and very much usually very for national bodies and national unions. However, in this particular case with NUS, I think it would be in the interest of Kent students to leave. The main backing behind this, and the main rationale, is ultimately, right now, NUS is facing a series of issues, be it its own internal politics and the issues around that, or the fact that it's struggling to engage with as much as a wider community as it did. An example of that can be seen in, for example, their recent cost of living survey, which got around 4,500 results-ish, which was on a national scale and was meant to get that kind of national outlook, whereas our local Kent Union cost of living crisis survey got 908 responses. So comparatively, on a local level, it's quite a big difference. Small. And now I truly do think NUS will regain its strength and get back to where it is. However, with 95%-ish of student unions being affiliated to it, I feel right now Kent's contribution to that isn't going to damage the NUS, but £26,000 a year could significantly benefit our students. And so even if because NUS has a lot of processes with the referendum, where if you launch a referendum to leave, you can then equally launch a referendum to rejoin. So I suppose, in a very overarching manner, my stance on NUS is, I think right now, it's in our interest to leave. I think there are issues that Kent students are facing that a sum of, even if we left for 2 years, £52,000 could be quite significant in helping. Whereas I feel right now NUS's benefits, NUS UK specifically, because we'll still remain a part of the charity side of it, which deals with, I can go into more on that if needs be. But for NUS UK specifically, I think that money would be better invested into our students, better help them through either the cost of living crisis or any other support they may need in the current sort of perhaps, I think tumultuous is the right word, time for university students.
I guess follow up to that would be you're saying hey, we could save £25,000. How would you reckon the union could reinvest that? As you said just then, cost of living crisis. How would that go towards £25,000?
So I suppose it's hard to specify exactly what it could be reinvested into. It could be reinvested into as any cost of living measures, for example, the Access to Activities Fund, or the Access to Learning Fund, any of those kind of hardship funds that can benefit students. But also, in a sense, even if it went into, I guess, I'm trying to think what in theory, the worst thing to say would be. So, for example, the scenario where you wouldn't see it going in theory into students is if it went into Kent Union's reserves, for example, which would be a backdrop. But those reserves still, in a sense, first of all, keep the university afloat. So Kent Union, out of the pandemic, for example, had some real issues, as did most student unions. However, thankfully, due to the reserves policy and the backdrop of that, we managed to keep a lot of the services and basic sort of necessities for students running and have kept it through that. Unfortunately, as a result of that, that reserves policy has since that reserves pot has since been drained, and even an addition to that could benefit students in the long term, be it not now. But on a more local level and perhaps a senior level, it could, as I say, go into those great cost of living measures, could go into any form of activities, could go into benefiting students, even supplying the advice team or many of the other kind of services that really do go directly into students, that I feel bringing it back into Kent Union, regardless of how that is, will benefit our students at Kent on a much more significant level than it would going into NUS as it stands. Oh, that's at least my belief. But, sorry,
No.
my final stance on it is I'm aware completely and wholeheartedly that that's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things with rerunning this referendum, as a sort of, I suppose, member of the board of trustees, there was a lot of decisions being made around it. And the last vote in the second referendum was, off the top of my head, I think it's
quite a low number.
Yeah, it was 400, around 400-ish votes. And if I remember correctly, it was 59% in favour of staying, with 41% in favour of leaving.
Yeah.
Now, the quoracy for that vote was set at 600.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, I would like to at least reach that number to find a thing, but the Board of Trustees were basically given the options of either staying in the US, leaving the US, or rerunning the referendum.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think even though it didn't reach quoracy, I think it was in the best interest to rerun this referendum, especially around Leeds Kent, where you can have a lot of students out and about. So the decision was made to put it there, particularly so we can get the real input. And if students vote to stay in the NUS, then regardless of my own beliefs and thoughts, then I will back NUS completely and put myself forward to be an NUS delegate in this position, so I can make sure to attend the conferences, attend any events, and make sure that I really sort of dive headfirst into that, if that's what the student population
follow on to that, is there any guarantee that there won't be a fourth referendum, say the quota is not reached again, which happened last year, or we could have a similar thing happen? It was 2020, in the last leadership election, like 3 years ago now, where it was an overwhelming stay in NUS, and say we don't reach the quota again. Do you reckon, is there a guarantee in place that students won't have to vote on this again in January?
Certainly, I think if this passes through, this will be the last referendum on NUS as a bare minimum this year. Certainly, for better or for worse, I think a decision will be made off the back of this.
Okay.
I think I've got a very strong belief and hope that quoracy will be met on this, so the sort of voice of the students will be. But generally, with NUS referendums, they are done for this year regardless, and for next year. The thing is, the way I see it is, if it meets that quoracy and we have a sort of body of the students that have come out with that voice, to me, that is...
Because the quoracy was met in 2020. Yeah. I think at the time of the election, it was, just last year? Was it the year before? I can't remember. But I guess that's what it comes to, right? Like, we can debate this, but there's no guarantee in place now.
Of course, no. As much as I would love to, I can guarantee it, I suppose, at least in my term. I will make sure that this doesn't come into fold, or do my best to stop it coming into fruition again.
Yeah.
However, you are completely right. Past that, I couldn't guarantee that sort of stance. I'd certainly like to, and it certainly would be a thing that I'd strive towards, sort of, because as you say, if this is the third or fourth referendum on this is too many times. A decision needs to be made this time, and it needs to be stuck with, which I'm very, very firm believer of.
Fair enough. Okay, I guess we can follow swiftly on to, why you're running again. This is you're in the incumbent position. There is no one else on this bench, sadly. So why are you running again? What's driving you?
So what's driving me is, truthfully, there's two things. First off, I really, really like this job. I enjoy it. I love working with the postgraduate community. I love sort of the difference of the day-to-day work. Even whilst it can be incredibly stressful at times, even the most tedious side of the admin, replying to emails, you get to see the ins and outs of university management. You get to help students on a daily basis. Sometimes it can be an individual who is struggling with something that may seem small in the grand scale of things, but to them can make the difference between them staying at university or dropping out. And then on a larger scale, you can sort of make big difference to the postgraduate community. I mean, even in my short time in this role so far, I've only been in it 6. Yeah, this will be March will be my 7th month in the role. Just having someone be a voice for PGs has had a noticeable difference in the university. I mean, for example, I know I'm sort of tangenting here. Please stop me if I'm getting too far away from the heart of the question. But the PG summer, for example, is something that anyone in Kent Union will slap me in the back of the head for saying again, because it seems to be all I talk about at the moment. But generally, that used to be a formerly union project. Like last year, it was very kind of quiet, under the radar. This year already, we've got backing of different university departments, divisionary backing to make it a sort of larger scale welcome week. There is a PG Experience committee, where key stakeholders within the university, so the student success teams, anyone who's involved in general student experience, they meet up and actually just discuss PG needs, which sounds so simple and so sort of basic, but it wasn't a fundamental part of the university structure.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to the original question, I guess, why I actually did, is why I've decided to rerun. I love the work. I really, really do have an ambition to put PGs back on the map, back on the university's radar, and make them as prioritized as undergraduates, or at least always in discussion as undergraduates are expected to be. And I think realistically, I've started this work in 6 months, and I think in 6 months' time I'll be able to finish some of those projects, but a lot of them are going to take a lot more legwork. They're going to take that time to make their way through the slightly tedious university bureaucracy system back up to the top.
I guess my follow-on to that is like something that you mentioned when you really relaxed, you gave a list of stuff you had achieved this year being the incumbent. One of those things that really stood out to me, especially me being a postgraduate myself, was you mentioned you helped out with UKRI's uplift of 10% to all PhD applicants, including myself. And I guess my follow-up is, how did you help out with that?
So, I mean, in fairness, this was one of the things that I suppose I got involved in very, very quickly into working in Kent Union, to be precise, about a week. So I was still sort of learning the basics and was like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'll give it my best.
Yeah.
And I received a message from a member of UCU who said, these debates going on with the university. What are you doing about it? Can you help? And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? What else am I doing?
No.
And so I happened to be having a lot of discussions with key stakeholders and started to discuss this UKRI increase, putting extra pressure on, say, the Graduate Research College, who I think were leading these discussions, and just making sure that they were almost aware that there was not only UCU's presence, but Kent Union's presence alongside, of course, the massive amount of PGRs and academics.
Yeah.
So generally, I suppose helping in that was lobbying, sort of supporting, making sure having those discussions with key stakeholders like the director of the Graduate Research College. So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use names just because I know we're sort of being broadcasted, but having those sort of discussions, pushing the agenda and making sure that it was clear that in this sort of cost of living crisis, when PhD students are frankly already underfunded,
it's so
a 10% increase is
huge.
Not only it's necessary. I think
it's an uplift of almost £100 a month. It's quite incredible on uplift,
which is brilliant, and
it's felt. It's a felt uplift. Do you reckon that goes far enough, or would you fight to see a further increase?
In an ideal world, I'd love to see a further increase. Yes, absolutely. And if that's, I mean, I suppose generally in the under the umbrella of the cost of living sort of push, that's certainly on the radar, and making sure that PhD students are supported as much with, I suppose it's less away from stipends and more towards sort of localized hardship funds, things that can help the students that are really struggling. I think with sort of a larger increase to the UKRI funding would require a lot more national lobbying and backing of sort of UCU. So while I'd love 100% to see that increased, I'm not sure I'd be able to sort of, I'd back it, but I wouldn't be able to put it through, I suppose, on my own. Generally speaking, with PhD students, I think they are underfunded. I think even with the 10% increase, it is helping them to survive, as you may know as a PhD student.
Yeah, it's
yourself.
Surviving, not exactly thriving. Is the best way I would put it. Right?
It's enough to live, not enough to live comfortably and sort of enjoy as many leisure activities as I think you should be able to with such an intensive and harsh sort of degree.
The pressure's there, so thank you so much. I guess the question next is, like, you might have noticed, there's no one else here.
No.
It's just me and you, and every other debate has been a proper debate where there's at least two people, I guess. Why do you reckon that is? Because I know you ran last year, you came in after no one else ran, and then there was 5 of you immediately after, I guess. Why do you reckon there's no one else sitting here?
So, I mean, we've got to make sure not to discount our chief candidate, Ron. Just in case.
Ron would sit here, don't worry. There's always an option, but...
No, yes. Generally speaking, why do I think there's no one here? So, I think for postgraduates, at least in my experience running last year as well, and the main reason I didn't run at that time, is March is just or February and March is a particularly pivotal time. You know, you've started that, or at least I'll talk about it from a master's perspective, I suppose, in that context. So you'll start from your sort of you've had your first term. You're now in the middle of sort of debating what your dissertation or end of year project's going to be, alongside writing those midterm essay or midterm projects, essays, whatever subject relevant assessment you may have. And I think the last thing on your mind at that point is what on earth is going on next year. You're kind of very in the moment, in the zone. Whereas I think when the by-election happened in May, because there weren't any candidates for the previous thing, at that point, it was a very strong, certainly from a PGT level or a postgraduate taught level, there was a strong focus on the dissertation. So thinking about the future was very much in place. And it was like, you know what? I think I could give that a go. And I think a lot of, during the debate last year, a lot of my fellow candidates also sort of echoed the same thing. I think perhaps there's room to look into and potentially even change the postgraduate experience position running at the same time.
Yeah.
I think it gets more engagement from students. You get a wider percentage of the student body generally engaging in the lead chem overarching elections. Yeah. But I think it would be more accessible for postgraduates if it was slightly later in the year, especially with the role starting in August instead of following suit with the other roles that start in June.
Yeah. Because obviously we're still going, right? Like, we've still got dissertations to submit. Exactly. So you have to keep going.
Exactly, yeah. It's just sort of, I think it comes at a very difficult time for postgraduate students. PGR candidates are, PhD or postgraduate research candidates are a lot rarer to come past, I think, as you may gather, because I think a lot of them, first of all, are very, very focused on their studies. To do a PhD in general, you have to be, I think, quite dedicated to that study of academia and usually have a further plan, I suppose. And also the difficulty of sort of intermitting your studies for a year, and that the effect that can have on funding can cause some problems. However, I promise it sounds like almost a little bit of a brag, but I promise it's not meant to come across. There were some candidates who I knew of, and one particularly who I believe is already wanting to run for next year that is doing a PhD, who had a discussion with me and asked if I was thinking of going for it. I was like, yeah, give it a go. And they responded, "Oh, I'll wait till next year then." And then, because they felt that I had sort of done a good job in the position so far, and felt, why not have you in there for another year and then I'll run when you're gone. So that's very overarching, I guess.
Yeah, that's okay. I guess a follow-up now is I get to ask you, as the incumbent, you're coming in from previous experience, and now you've had time in the role, and you're looking back, and you're also looking forward. What do you see as the number one priority for PGRs? PGRs and PG.
PGTs, yeah. So is it postgrads as a whole?
Yeah.
So I guess one of the hardest things in this role, without a shadow of a doubt, is the individual needs of master's students and PhD students and how massively different they are. It's ultimately, there's very few times that you can group them in one category. However, I feel if you have to do it, and certainly it's an issue that I think is one of the biggest for all postgrads as a whole, is just sort of being unnoticed and underrepresented by the university and the union. Where it's guilty as an overarching institutional problem that these kind of every student that's doing a postgrad is we don't forget about postgrads. It's the last thing. PhD students especially are sort of very off the radar, very off the map for university stakeholders. And I admit in a lot of my meetings that I've done this year, for example, so I'm a member of the University Council, which is sort of top decision-making body within the university, Senate, which is the board that feeds into council, which has a lot of the academics on, and several more that have lots of annoying acronyms and things like that. But generally, a lot of my work within those boards will be constantly, so there'll be this large discussion. It'll be like, okay, well, let's just remember the postgraduates here. One particular example, for example, is a discussion, I have to think not to breach any confidentiality here, a discussion around cost of living. The discussion was focused, and this was sort of a high-level discussion in the university. It was focused completely on maintenance loans and how they weren't, tuition fees and maintenance loans were frozen and they weren't changing. And even bringing in the postgraduate perspective on maintenance loans was something that wasn't being discussed, wasn't being looked at, wasn't being even thought about. Because your postgraduate loans, for example, I think it's a flat £11,000, £12,000-ish that that you get, and that covers your tuition and your daily maintenance. With sort of rising costs of postgraduate courses, with the lack of caps on postgraduate courses, and the rising rent situation, that loans, if you're lucky enough to cover your tuition and your rent, and sometimes maybe a Mars bar. For those that aren't lucky, it's not enough to cover your tuition and your rent. And that's only looking at, say, Kent's perspective. I mean, even in other sectors, it's even other universities that have higher fees, it's even worse. So, yeah, I guess one of the most important things, 100%, or one of the biggest issues that I think postgraduates face is just being sort of neglected or forgotten. They're always a second case. And with those huge diverse differences between master's students and PhD students, even, not having enough time and discussion and representation for those groups leads to overarching strategies for undergraduates that just so happen to also be for postgraduates, and nothing sort of gets done that helps those communities in the issues that they directly face.
Because obviously, like, how are you going to, coming on from the back of that, how do you reckon you're going to tackle that? Because obviously, being like, I'm a postgraduate researcher, there is a distinct disconnect from us who do research and those that do masters. How do you reckon you're going to divide, bridge that gap?
Of course. So, a big priority of mine this year, and it will continue to be so for next year, is this, I suppose, this sense of rebuilding a form of postgraduate community. I think it was present around 2019, 2018, for example, when Wolf College was, or Wolf Accommodation, was the postgrad accommodation. So it's very easy to find a space where you could have that large-scale community. Without that, it's become a lot more difficult. So initiatives, for example, this year, going back to it again, this PG Summer thing, the idea of the PG Summer is to genuinely, first of all, have a focus for the entire university on postgrads. No more saying, we've got September to June as our academic term. No, you have students that are going to be here from June to September, and there's nothing that happens in this campus. So having that, for example, is one way of sort of re-putting them on the radar. And in that few months, there's segments that are based on trying to encourage different departments of the university to make sure they almost start focusing on this. So for example, these events are all still being planned, so there may be some changes with them. But there's going to be a research showcase, which is going to give the opportunity for PhD researchers across all divisions, across all schools, to actually present their work, network with one another, see that sort of environment going on. But also that's going to be accessible to the PGT students or the master's students who want to sort of view it, research it. Perhaps they're even interested in those fields as a whole, and going in there. Also, there's sort of events on employability focused directly on postgraduates. So, bringing in alumni that have done either a PhD course or done a master's course and then have succeeded in their field to really kind of, first of all, inspire that postgraduate community. Second of all, to show them actually, what I'm doing, why I'm spending all this money, how much effort, especially for PhD students and sort of the well-being issues around that, why I'm putting in this absurd amount of stress into this thing. What am I going to get out at the end of it? Also, with July, we'll generally look towards a more social focus, so putting Kent Union on the spot for making postgraduate style events, making sure that, we're getting almost that early experience for example, Welcome Week, when you get the new postgrads in. I mean, the Welcome Week this September, for example, for postgraduates was completely lacking. There was one event, which was the Network Coffee Social, and without having that I sort of came in a little too late to actually alter that. I was hoping to, but my tenure started on August 22nd, so I didn't quite have a chance to influence too much in Welcome Week. But yeah, July, hopefully to give Kent Union a more social experience of the PGs, learn how to actually sort of make events that are going to cater to them, to give them a sense of community, give them a sense of a bit more what to do on campus. And then August is going to have a very, very sharp focus on well-being. To, first of all, again, with departments like Student Support and Wellbeing, or the Student Learning Advisory Service, to make sure they really also start to understand postgraduate issues, understand how to access them. Also, for our master's students that are finishing their dissertations, or our PhD students who are stressed on their projects or coming towards their vivas, because I believe they tend to come
They
around
come
the time.
out all throughout the year.
Yeah. I suppose if you're going to the funding deadline, then it sometimes can. Yeah. Sorry. But yes, focus on well-being for them. So kind of drop-in events like just come get a coffee, have something to have a relax, have a breathe, have a chat with someone else to rant about how sort of stressed everything is right now. And also, of course, the usual therapy dogs, because any opportunity to get a dog on campus is a
top
perfect
priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a very, very, very,
what
very
about for January though? Because I know for at least PGR there is like you have 2 start dates. You either start in September or you start in January. How do you see that happening? Because obviously you're gonna have to run almost like double the amount of events.
Of course, yeah. So for our January intake, I can speak from, I suppose, a Kent Union perspective. There's usually a sort of welcome back week, so to speak. So catering that certainly as well to make sure, particularly because a lot of our, speaking I suppose from a master's perspective, a lot of our January intake tend to be international students that have come to the university for the first time, and if they've missed welcome week, it can be quite. It's a really big place, a very daunting thing, and you're, in a lot of cases for the international students I've spoken to, this is sort of their first time almost speaking English consistently throughout their studies. They've got to adapt that to their education then, and everything around that. I think having something in January is vital, and something I tried to do this January that's just passed. There was a few events, for example. We continued with the theme of coffee social. There was also a little. I realise I'm going to say coffee to cocktails. It sounds like there's 2 things. I promise there's more than coffee with a PG perspective, but also there's sort of implementing film nights and things like that, just to make sure that there is, for January 2, that welcoming environment. I think the main trouble with that, I suppose, speaking critically about it as well, instead of just saying it's all going to be great, is engaging with those new students can be especially tricky. So I suppose on the how to bring PGs back into the fold question as a whole as well, something that I've been trying with varying levels of success to do is improve the comms to postgraduate students. So making sure that I have almost access to PGs as a whole, to not add to more white noise emails that they might see. For example, Kent Union's emails that go out are very interesting, very full of stuff, but they can sometimes have a really strong undergraduate focus. And if, speaking from experience from my own postgrad, you open them, you see it's undergrad, you close it, and then you don't look at them again. And so separating out a fresh making sure that it literally just screams postgrad, and making sure that information goes out is pretty vital. Hopefully it'll help with building that sense of community and getting that wider postgraduate sense, which I think in turn, having that wider postgraduate community, that wider sense, will in turn make the university understand that this is now a community that is not in sort of siloed sections of experience. They are a collective community, and their voice is just as important as the undergraduates, as are their needs and sort of what they're looking for in their university experience.
That's fair enough. I guess this kind of leads us nicely onto like the last question of the evening, and it's obviously postgraduates are kind of in, as you said, they're quite weirdly divided, where we have master's students and we have the postgraduate researchers. UCU is going to be the topic, of course. UCU strikes are going on for quite a while. They're currently on pause right now from the negotiations off the back of strikes. Kent Union voted not to back the strikes this time. What's your opinion about the strikes?
So I suppose I'm going to give the most annoying of 2 answers in this, and I'll give a personal perception and then what I try and do in this role. So as a personal perception, I support the strikes completely. I understand why they certainly are academics, and even to an extent our PGR students are entitled to fair working conditions, better pay, and just to be of course the pension side of it as well. But they just deserve to be treated as the sort of incredible. They're doing incredible work and deserve to be paid and represented as such in that work. However, from a role perspective, as you said, this is where it sort of comes in. So, as I will do with, as I mentioned, I do with NUS earlier, is certainly do whatever. If the student voice backs it, I want to make sure that I'm following that. I want to make sure that I'm doing my best to be the postgraduate voice on campus, not just have the title for the sake of having it and then doing what I think is best. I want to make sure that I listen. UCU was one of those examples, actually. So I spoke to both. So I liaised with a wonderful PG network, which is run by some absolutely incredible people this year. But I liaised with them, some PGT students and some PGR students, and just generally tried to get feedback. I tried to distance myself from the undergraduate voice as much as possible to make sure that when it came to Parliament, which is where that sort of decision is decided, I was giving the most reflective view of the community. Now, what tends to happen in these discussions is PGT or master's students tend to be very far of we don't support the strikes, and the PGR community tend to be we're very in favour of the strikes, and so in turn it becomes a balancing act of figuring out which group. So, for example, the last strike vote, Kent Union voted in support, and I was very kind of strong in supporting that strike as well. This time, however, the thing that sort of altered my opinion, and in the end I had to vote not to support the strike, or chose to vote not to support the strikes, I suppose, was because the PGT community was, as expected, very against, especially with its sort of growing international population. They're only here for a year. They're kind of like, we don't know what's going on. We've paid a lot of money to be here. Why are we missing out 3 weeks of classes? Which I understood completely. From the PGR perspective, though, and the sort of the reason for this vote was actually, even amongst some of the PGRs I spoke to in the sort of PhD community, there was some hostility or negativity towards the strikes. There was one instance, one of the PhD students I spoke to, for example, the sort of strike date had led to their Viva being disrupted, which meant it had to be remote, I believe, instead of in person as expected. And they were currently, I believe, in Malta, studying with doing their stuff. I won't give too many details to give anything away about the student, but yeah, they were in Malta, and because of this having to be moved online, they moved to a lab in Hungary just so they could have a more stable internet connection, so they could do their Viva, which cost them significant amount of income, which I understand as well. There was also just some sort of, I suppose, annoyance of not being able to contact supervisors. But generally, the thing that set it for me this time was the mixture of opinions in the PGR community instead of the more solid backing that it's seen in the past. So, yes, that's a very long way of saying, personally, I support the strikes, I completely do, and I understand why they're happening. In terms of how I will try and represent the students, is I want to get as many voices as possible, listen to them, and then make the decision that they want to see, so I can accurately be a sort of voice for them and a representative of them, instead of sort of going with my own.
I guess my follow-up to that is, like, would you, because the PGR network, is like the vast they might be, isn't the whole body, would you see maybe a referendum on, like, Kent Union's perspective of UCU maybe next time?
Of course. So what do you mean by that? Sorry.
Like, instead of, like, holding individual, like, speaking with, like, the network, maybe holding a referendum on the issue.
Oh, of course, yes.
Would you agree with that?
So, I suppose just clarifying as well, sorry, yeah, so I spoke to the PG network and different cohorts of students. Luckily, the PG network's made up of PGRs and PGTs, which is quite helpful. I believe one of them's even a member of UCU, which is obviously quite telling of where they sat. As for a Kent Union's perspective of UCU is quite interesting. I'm trying to think. So, would it be sort of
like similar in vein to the referendum we're holding now?
For NUS,
yeah, yes or no back. Like in a similar vein, like Kent Union to back UCU during current strike action, yes, no.
See, I think a referendum would work. My only concern with a referendum is, I suppose, two key factors. The first is that in the end of the day, obviously, it's a very undergraduate university. We have an 85% undergraduate population versus the 15% postgrad.
Yeah.
Now, most undergraduates you'll speak to, certainly that are in second and third year, will be against strike action.
Mm-hmm.
However, as we've been discussing in the postgraduate community, that's very different. I think a referendum would perhaps not give enough of a chance for people to explain, to try and debate with those who may be of differing opinions. For example, we've seen some postgraduates persuade undergraduates and vice versa, actually, in the sense that these kind of discussions can lead to decision change. Whereas I think if we had it as a flat sort of almost question posed of should we support UCU strikes or not, my one worry would be anyone who had been impacted by these strikes negatively in the past few years would immediately vote no. As for if it's a good idea overarchingly, I can see...
Because obviously there's a reflection to the current referendum. Is that the best way forward to ask the student body? Would you like see an analogue between the two? Because obviously, as a postgraduate, NUS might not necessarily have the hugest impact. Mainly, it's quite targeted towards the undergraduate community.
That's very true. Very true. So, I mean, I suppose in terms of holding it to try and get a wider perception of the student voice. So Kent Union will go out during these strike consultations and basically pester as many people as we can to find out what their opinion is, and then split that into a divisionary model. We don't take any more information of them, for example, year of study or anything, just to make sure that it's as anonymized as possible. But those voices and feedback then do sort of usually form into a paper that will be circulated to give the members who are discussing that in Parliament a wider perception of the student body. However, I do also see your point that, realistically, I think the last time we did that, we spoke to, I'm going to say a number, it might be completely wrong. I think it was just over 100-ish people. Which
was this on both Canterbury campus and the Medway campus, or was this just one?
I believe this may just have been Canterbury. There may have been feedback from Medway, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Would you see that change? Because obviously the Medway campus is, of course, very important.
Yeah. Yes, actually, yes, certainly. I'm in an ideal world, I'm hoping that we will never have to see support for a UCU action again and everything goes through.
Yeah.
But realistically, I think this is definitely an issue that's going to come back again. I think surveying Medway will be incredibly important. I myself am trying to have a sort of wider focus on Medway during both my current time and also the next term that's coming up, because, as you say, that sort of growing, especially PGT body on that campus is huge. So I'd make sure that they had their say in as well. But I realise we've tangented very far away from the sort of initial question: should it be a referendum? The reason I've rambled about this so long is, truthfully, I'm not sure. I think there's definitely room to change the way we have the strike discussions and the strike stands. I think the most difficult thing is gaining student engagement in that issue as a whole. For example, even with NUS that you said didn't affect too many students, there was a turnout of sort of 400. Getting the engagement with, if the engagement could be got with strikes, and we could have people show up to, say, like the strike forums that we run between the university and UCU to sort of give both perceptions, I think it'd be great to have a referendum. My only worry is it would be overwhelmed by a majority. Either undergrads that were majority against, or maybe if it sort of went under the radar, maybe you'd have a lot of PhD UCU members that would push it the other way, which admittedly has its benefits. But it's a very long-winded way of saying I'd worry about the engagement with that referendum if it went through. But I don't think it's an inherently bad idea at all.
Okay. Questions? Oh. Okay. Well, thank you for coming tonight. It's been a pleasure. This has been the debate for postgraduate studies. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.